Welcome to This Explainer. Look, today we're unpacking the deeply distressing, violent incidents that just unfolded on the streets of Edinburgh. We're going to do this by entirely separating the strict, fact-based criminal investigation from the much broader and honestly much noisier national conversation. When a community is shaken up like this, it's absolutely crucial to take a step back and look at the evidence objectively. To do that, we'll quickly walk through the two unfolding stories, break down the actual mechanics of the incident, define the legal response, look into the ecosystem of radicalization, and finally, touch on the principles of consistent justice. Let's jump right in. All right, Section 1, the two unfolding stories. Whenever an event of this magnitude hits the news, you actually have two entirely distinct stories unfolding right alongside each other. On one side, there's the criminal investigation, right? It's methodical, it's evidence-based, and strictly bound by legal process. But on the other side, you've got the national conversation, this swirling, incredibly noisy public debate about motive, radicalization, and whether red flags were missed. Now, the crucial mistake here, and really the central premise we're tackling today, is the danger of letting that public reaction outpace the hard facts. We literally cannot let the conversation outrun the investigation. So, moving on to Section 2, the mechanics of the incident. Let's start with a hard fact. Five men were injured in these attacks, and 3 of them actually required hospital treatment. Before we even start getting into motives or the broader societal impacts, we need to ground ourselves in the stark reality of the physical harm that was inflicted here. Look, this wasn't some abstract concept. These were real people subjected to serious violence. What we know right now is serious enough on its very own. The actual reality on the ground unfolded incredibly fast. Friday evening kicked off with a fast-moving sequence of assaults straight across Leith Walk and Sighthill. Then, as Friday night rolled on, the attacks specifically zeroed in on worshippers who were just leaving the Broomhouse Mosque. By the weekend, Police Scotland had stepped in, pinning down and charging a 36-year-old suspect. The picture painted by our sources here is pretty alarming. Essentially, a shirtless individual rampaging with a weapon, battering restaurant doors in this swift, chaotic escalation. Now, the psychology at play here is bizarre, to say the least. While being pinned down by the police, the attacker was literally screaming that he was protecting the country. The profound irony there? In trying to act as this self-appointed sentinel of the state, engaging in completely unprovoked violence actually subverts the very rule of law that holds our entire society together. Honestly, it's the textbook mantra of a radicalized lone wolf. Which naturally brings us to Section 3, defining the legal response. Okay, let's clear up a massive misconception that absolutely floods social media every single time an event like this happens. There is a huge, fundamental difference between early ideological indicators and a formal legal declaration of terrorism. A formal declaration is a heavy, legally binding label, and it's decided strictly by prosecutors and courts, definitely not by TV commentators. But if there are early indicators, say signs of anti-Muslim hatred, counter-terrorism policing Scotland steps in immediately to support the investigation. Now, their presence doesn't mean it's legally been declared terrorism just yet. It simply means the authorities are taking those ideological indicators incredibly seriously, right from hour one. In fact, Prime Minister Keir Starmer swiftly identified this incident as being motivated by anti-Muslim hatred. So that immediate inclusion of counterterrorism officers, paired with this very clear statement from the Prime Minister, represents a vital legal distinction. It completely elevates the incident from a localized breakdown of public order into something else entirely, an act fundamentally designed to intimidate a specific community. Let's take a step back for Section 4, the ecosystem of radicalization. This right here is perhaps the most critical part of our explainer today. We really have to look at the sort of production line of violence. We have to look beneath the surface of the individual attacker to understand the broader ecosystem that breeds this stuff. It usually starts right at the top. Political figures and media flirt with inflammatory language, which over time normalizes hostility. Then, these highly fragmented online echo chambers take that and weaponize those cultural anxieties. And finally, that normalized hostility manifests as physical violence down at the micro level where the radicalized lone wolf actually commits the attack. The lone actor, they're really just the final tragic component of this entire production line. The Muslim Council of Britain used these exact words to describe how their community feels in the Scottish capital following the attacks. Rightly nervous and worried. And honestly, based on the sources, they have every reason to be. This highlights the ultimate function of ideologically motivated terror. The goal isn't merely to injure the immediate victims. It's practically designed to make an entire community feel completely unsafe in places where they should feel perfectly secure, especially around their places of worship. That psychological ripple effect, that is the intended goal. And that brings us to our final part. Section 5, Principles of Consistent Justice. So, how do we respond as a society? Well, justice demands strict consistency. I know in modern politics it's so tempting to judge an event by who committed it rather than what actually happened. You know how it goes. If the suspect is Muslim, some immediately jump to the word terrorism. If the suspect is white, suddenly some folks become extremely reluctant to use that exact same vocabulary. But if someone deliberately targets a community to intimidate them, we have to apply our vocabulary and our seriousness consistently, totally regardless of the attacker's background. We have to rely on hard evidence, not assumptions. And perhaps most importantly, individuals commit crimes. The actions of one person tells us absolutely nothing about millions of innocent people. Communities should never, ever carry collective blame. We're going to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. The legal process has officially begun. The state can and absolutely will prosecute the individual to the absolute limit of the law. But here's the real question. How does society police the ideological fever swamps of the internet that radicalized him in the very first place? Until public figures fully realize that their words carry a heavy compound interest, the social fabric remains at grave risk from those who genuinely think they can save a country by tearing it apart at the seams. Think about that as you process the news this week. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep asking the right questions.